In this video, we'll talk about materials that you'll need to get started. Every artist has their favorite brushes and colors and paints. I'll share my favorites with you, and I hope you find it helpful as you find what works for you. And we'll keep it simple. So we need just a few supplies, something to put the paint on and mix the paint. You'll need watercolor paints, round brushes, we'll talk about this in a moment, watercolor paper or some kind of paper, a container for water, a towel, paper towels for cleanup, and if you don't have these specific materials, use what you have on hand as you experiment. To put the paint, you need something to put the paint on. It might be a palette like this. This is my favorite palette. It might be a plate. Anything that the color will not soak into. I use this hinged plastic palette, and it comes in 2 different colors. For the paints, first of all, I encourage you to use what you have on hand. In these lessons, I use tubes. The small tubes are fine. It's interesting how a little tube of paint like this really lasts a long time. Like it could last you weeks to months because you just use a little bit of paint. In our school, we use Winsor and Newton professional watercolor paints. If you're new to this, you could use Winsor and Newton Cotman. They're less expensive. They're student grade paints, very good quality, or use any kind of watercolor paint that you have on hand. Should you use tubes? Should you use pans? Use what works for you. I like to use tubes. They contain a smooth paste of paint. It's like toothpaste, and you squeeze just a little bit onto your palette and then you add water. Pans contain dry, solid paint, and you add water to wake up the color. Tubes or pans, do what works best for you. We use a pointed round brush in our lessons. It has a narrow pointed tip so you can create details and you can create fur and use the side of the brush to lay in larger areas of color. In these lessons, you'll see 3 brushes. Use any brush that you have on hand. You don't have to use 3, just use 1. Use what you have. I'll use an old, cheap brush for mixing color, a small brush for details, and a medium-sized brush to fill larger shapes. I have 2 favorite small brushes I'll share with you. They're synthetic brushes. They're soft, but they're sturdy enough that they'll keep a fine point and you can create details and fur. This one is called a Michael Klein Pointed Round Brush number 2. It's from Rosemary and Company in England. It looks like this. And the brush head is pretty small. It's about a little less than ½ an inch. And that's my favorite brush for creating details and thin lines. So you'll see this used in a lot of more recent tutorials. Another brush that I like to use is this Raphael Golden Synthetic Pointed Round Brush. It's a size 0. It's about the same size as the one I just showed you, and you can purchase this one in the United States. I also like to use a medium-sized brush for filling in larger areas. In Princeton Velvetouch Long Round number 6, the brush head is about 3/4 inch. And then I also use an inexpensive and old brush for mixing colors on the palette, and I save my good brushes for painting. But if you only have 1 brush, just use that brush. That's fine. As far as watercolor paper, if you're just starting out, use any paper that you have on hand. Even if it's not watercolor paper, just get a piece of paper and start. Or you could purchase inexpensive watercolor paper. The results might not look quite the same as what you see in this lesson, but that's okay. In these lessons, we'll use Osh 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. Now, here's what that means. Osh is the brand name. 140 pounds is the weight of the paper. Now, the piece of paper doesn't weigh 140 pounds, but that's how they describe the weight of the paper. The color is natural white. Cold pressed means that the texture is slightly rough, and you could Buy a large piece of the paper and then cut it down to whatever size you like. I often do that. Or you could use a block, a watercolor block, which is sheets of paper stacked together and they're glued along the edges. This is what a block looks like. Now, this is hot pressed paper. It's the cold pressed is green. The hot pressed is pink. The hot pressed is very smooth, but this is what it looks like. So right around the edge, all these sheets of, there are how many sheets in here? There are 20 sheets in this block, and they're glued together just along the side so you can create your painting. And then when you're finished, you can stick like a knife in here and remove the paper from the block, and then you'll have another piece of paper to work with. So this just helps to keep the paper flat. You want the green one, not the pink one. And usually I purchase these large pieces of watercolor paper and then I cut them down to size. So I encourage you to use whatever size you wish, whatever works best for you. The other things you might need, the other things you do need, container for water. I like to use a Tupperware container. You'll need a towel or paper towels. And I'm right-handed, so this is what my setup looks like. It's set up on my right. You know, I encourage you to just find a small area. That's all you need. A table and a chair, natural light, or if you paint at night, a natural light bulb. So is there a small space where you can set up and keep your supplies? Somewhere you can just lay everything out and leave it there? And maybe if you have pets or there's just no space, place all of your supplies in a container because there's just a few things that you need, and just find a space, take everything out, set it up, paint, and then put it away when you're done. My first space was in a corner of the living room, just a small table near a window. I used that for about a year, and then I moved into an upstairs bedroom. If you'd like to purchase the paints that we use in our watercolor school, you'll need only a few colors: burnt umber or burnt sienna, French ultramarine blue. When you combine the brown and blue, you can create all kinds of grays and blacks and browns, yellow ochre and permanent rose. When you combine those two colors, you can create the pinks that you see in noses, ears, tongue, and gums, and around eyes. And sometimes we use Winsor blue-green shade and Winsor lemon. Those are the most common colors that we use in our watercolor school. And if you want to keep it really simple, simply purchase burnt umber, French ultramarine blue, and yellow ochre. And there it is. Everything you need to get started with watercolor painting. So your assignment is to obtain your materials or use what you have on hand. But keep it simple. Keep it inexpensive until you know that you like this style of painting. And if you have any questions, if you need assistance, feel free to reach out to me, email, or comment. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.